Yeah, something that I think would be fun to vote on and talk about is something I've actually talked with Travis about is the age to vote.
Okay. Do you think that would be different from the age of adulthood?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, let's hear
So
it.
I actually don't know what my position is on this, but I think there's a compelling case to be made that like um if you're working you should be able to vote because your tax dollars are you want some representation. So that would be as early as like 14 at least in the states.
Okay. Anybody else have a thought on that? Phil, are you still there?
Yes, I'm
Yeah,
just driving.
Oh,
Can you
okay.
hear me okay?
Yeah. Do you want to talk now, or do you want to wait till you're not driving? Either way is good.
Um, I I think on this issue, it's not that big of a deal. I'll just listen. There's probably a lot of background noise here too.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay, Travis, what are your thoughts?
well, yeah, in my view is basically what Jerome just stated. I think that the voting age should be like tied to the working age. So
Hmm.
if we're going to make it such that a 14-year-old is legally allowed to vote, um, I think that a 14-year-old should be. Or if we're going to make it so that a 14-year-old is legally allowed to work, I think we should make it so that they're legally allowed to vote as well. I
Okay.
think Jerome's actually somewhat shifted his position towards my view because I think originally before we talked, I think his original position was that like the voting age should also be 25, if I recall
Yeah.
correctly.
Yeah, yeah. I one of my favorite things. A lot of people think that it's bad to change positions. I love being convinced to change my position because it means I've heard new ideas.
Yeah, I
Um,
don't think. Oh, I was just going to make a comment on changing positions. I think it kind of depends on the context. Um, I think like a lot of times, like when people like criticize like flip flopping on positions, I feel like a lot of times that criticism is made in the context of like politicians who like people suspect are like changing their positions out of like non-genuine reasons, like they're just trying to appeal to like a voter base, or like they're not like expressing their genuine views. So I think that's kind of where a lot of the distaste for like changing positions comes from. I think like if you genuinely like change your mind, if like you used to think something but now you really are convinced, there's no problem with that. It's just the kind of like cynical kind of misrepresenting what you really think that I think people dislike.
Gotcha. Okay, Jerem, I'm going to challenge your view here, and then Travis, if you have another thought besides Jerem's, hop in here, and then obviously anybody else can hop in too.
Or
Okay,
technically it was my view first, but you know.
that's why I'm challenging Jerem first. I'll explain why in a second if it doesn't seem clear. But yes, I do see it as your view. Okay, Jerem, what? Okay, let's say we did this, and voting for president and our local representatives was whatever age of working, and then let's say 10 years later, automation and AI take over. All the jobs are covered. Our resources are really good. So now there's a UBI. Everybody has all the money in the world. Nobody needs to work. Do we just say the last age of working is the voting age, or do we now adjust it based off mental maturity?
If okay, so nobody's working. We live in a UBI world.
Let's say only 5 to 10% of people are working. It's people that choose to work, or but yeah, for the most part, there's not many workers in this hypothetical.
I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't see really. I wouldn't have a huge issue with just keeping it at the same age. Um, I might be able to be convinced that it should be raised after that, but um, yeah, I don't think I have a strong opinion, a
Okay.
strong view on.
Travis, what do
Yeah.
you think? And then Matt and Lewis hop in there too after that. What do you think, Travis?
Yeah, so I mean, when I say that, if you're working, you should be able to vote. Like, I just kind of mean that in the sense of, if you're allowed to vote. I mean, if you're allowed to, if we've deemed you mature enough to work, I don't really see. Like, if you're at a point where you're working, you're like paying taxes, I don't really see why you shouldn't also have a say in like how that tax money is spent. Um, Also, I just want to say one thing to this person, SD, in the chat who says, so children should be allowed to vote. Are we being serious here? Like, what's the argument against allowing 14-year-olds to vote? Because out of all the arguments, most of the arguments I've seen against lowering the voting age are really bad ones. And I don't see why most of them wouldn't apply to like prohibiting a significant portion of adults from voting as well.
Yeah, and we'll see if SD has anything else to say in there. Okay.
If I could
Matt.
jump in on that real quick.
Oh yeah, go for it.
I just wanted to mention that I agree. A lot of people, I think, will reflexively assume that children shouldn't be able to vote. But we have to remember this is not asking children to write law bills. This is not asking children to have some great responsibility. This is saying that in a system where millions of people all pool their votes together, that we're actually also making lawmakers accountable to children. So there's not like you can definitely see how there would be a benefit to that. And it's not like, I think when people actually do a thought experiment of like, what would the negative outcomes of that be? Oh no, like a kid suddenly will decide he's going to vote against a politician. Why? Because he has his own interests. Like this isn't something where you're putting power, like undue power, in the hands of a child.
Yeah. I mean, I just say like the most common argument I hear against lowering the voting age is just that like, oh, well, like these people are teenagers or two. They don't know enough to vote. Like they're too ignorant. But like I don't see why such a standard wouldn't apply to most people 18 and up as well, because many voters are also ignorant, and yet we allow them to vote anyway. So I don't really see that as a symmetry breaker. Seems like a double standard there. If we're going to allow adults to vote, even if they're ignorant about the political process, if they're ignorant about politics, why would we like use that as a reason to prohibit teenagers from voting?
Matt, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult one for me because I've obviously got problems with sort of government on a fundamental level and feel like things should run more like a voluntary collective kind of system. So the whole kind of voting taxation thing. I mean, I do definitely agree with what the previous guy said with regards to the hypocrisy of having people work and even pay taxes but not be allowed to vote into the system that they're contributing towards and stuff. So, if you're a part of something, then you should have a say in how that's run. But obviously, I wouldn't have a problem with 14-year-olds having the right to vote. But for me, it would be within a totally fundamentally different system that's non-coercive. So,
Gotcha.
I don't have strong opinions on the voting thing because they could go lots of different ways depending on how the participants want it to be.
Yeah. And even though in our own society we don't have to compare it to other things, like so far, the people that make the decisions are us lawmakers, and therefore other people's votes don't affect things. If we want to vote on how we think things should go, if our society involved like a president and representatives and stuff like that, then I think it's good to see where we stand. And I think that I'll propose that law in the next set of laws.
By
Lewis,
the way, I just wanted to say one more thing on the voting thing, which is that there's actually polls, just to like illustrate my point. There's actually polls that have been done that show like a significant portion of Americans cannot name the three branches of government. Like if you ask them
Yeah.
to name them, they don't know. It actually used to be a majority of Americans couldn't. So I know, like in high school, I actually did a speech, like arguing for lowering the voting age, and that was one of the things I cited. That the majority of Americans can't name the three branches of government. Now, since then, I've looked at more recent polls, and it's actually the number has actually gone down. Now most people can, but it's still a significant portion of Americans, the electorate that can't name it. So like, if we're gonna have all these people voting, like, I mean, I don't think it makes much sense to prohibit 14-year-olds from voting on the basis that they don't know enough.
Yeah, I was just watching something actually recently. I think I watched it yesterday, but it was about. Oh yeah, I think I sent it to Lewis too, and he watched it. But it was about how we got to the age of adulthood being 18, and like all these different things. And there was this issue where people were being sent to war, specifically Vietnam War, at like age 18 and 19, and like tens of thousands of people died in war at ages 18 and 19, but they weren't considered adults yet. And so this led to a I don't know if it was a constitutional change, but anyways, it led to there was a whole bunch of protests of teenagers saying we want to be considered adults if we have to go to war, and that kind of thing changed how that worked. So, so yeah, I think it would be interesting to ask for the vote, like if 14 on up. Well, right now in the U.S., I think it's 18 to vote, so maybe to have a higher likelihood of passing the bill you want to pass, maybe we should ask for 16. Or Jerem, I'll just leave it up to you. Do you want me to ask for 14 or ask for 16, and then we'll try to get lower in the future?
I would just ask for it to be tied to working age.
Okay.
Yeah.
I want to make a comment on this
Yeah.
other thing in the chat. Veganism Debunked says we should give voting rights to animals just to not discriminate based on species. After all, they are not too far from some children or adults when it comes to understanding politics. Like prohibiting animals from voting is not necessarily a speciesist position, right? Like when we talk about allowing children to vote, in this context, in this conversation, we're referring to 14 and up. Like, we're not talking about allowing babies to vote. So, like, if we have a prohibition of allowing, like, a newborn infant to vote, and we also are prohibiting animals from voting, like, there's no species-based discrimination that's going on there.
Okay, Lewis, do you have any thoughts on the voting thing before we hop to one last thing?
Yes, I do. So I'm not necessarily opposed to lowering the age of voting. I'm not entirely sure what the appropriate age would be. I think a case, a compelling case, would need to be made in order for me to, to go along with lowering the age and to what specific age. But definitely tying that voting age to working age is not a compelling case at all. I have seen no salient argument for why that would, just because somebody can vote, just because somebody can pay taxes, to me that is not a sufficient argument. It's not a sufficiently compelling argument for being allowed to vote. And sure, you could cherry pick and say that there is a certain percentage of 14-year-olds who possess a level of knowledge that would equip them to making sensible choices as to who, would be best suited to lead jurisdictions or country or whatever. But just because you're allowed to work, to me, that is not a compelling argument at all. Because, I mean, somebody could be working who has very little knowledge or no knowledge of our system and how voting impacts society. They could be working at a stock stocking cans of tomato sauce or whatever. And just because they're paying taxes, that there's no like intelligence required to pay taxes. It just comes out of your, there's like when you file your taxes. I don't even remember when I was that age. I did work. I worked off the books, so I didn't pay taxes. But even when my first paying taxes job was just like a 1, 2, 3 thing to pay taxes, didn't take any level of serious intelligence. So my point is that I'm not necessarily opposed to lowering the age of voting, but tying it to working age is not at all a compelling argument. I have not heard a good reason why that should be.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting point because, it does come down to what you're doing. Because if we say that somebody can work a job like stocking cans of tomatoes at 14, but that somebody, the legal age of consent to decide like if you're going to have sex with a 30-year-old, the legal age of consent is like 16, saying that if you can work, then you can vote on a political system, but you're not quite old enough to decide who you're having sex with. Like these things are interesting, and I think it all comes down to developed brain. If your brain's developed enough to stock tomato cans, but not developed enough to decide cosmetic surgeries and who you're having sex with and these kind of things, then maybe it shouldn't be developed enough to, maybe it's not developed enough to vote in politicians.
I just want to point out that everything here that's been said about 14-year-olds, that, you can have them, they're just stocking tomato cans, they have no knowledge of the political system, all of that can also apply to adults. And so I just ask, if there's an adult in the same situation, their job is just stocking tomato cans, they have virtually no political knowledge, would you also favor prohibiting them from voting?
No, I think the difference is it's pointing out that just if you do stock tomato cans, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're at a level to decide something.
Correct. That's a straw. Right. Travis is straw man my position. That's a complete straw man of mine. I didn't say that no teenager at 14, or just because they're stocking tomato cans, don't have the intelligence to vote. That is a straw man of my position. They may have the intelligence. I don't know. I think that
so I don't think you actually know what a straw man is. I didn't.
You did straw man. You just straw man.
No, okay.
Yes, you did, Travis.
Lewis,
yes, you did straw man. You stopped the bullshit.
Things.
You straw man me. Stop the bullshit. You've done this many times before. Just stop the bullshit. Stop that right now. You straw man.
Lewis.
You did not.
I've interacted with you
did not
before.
steal my argument. You did not steal man my argument. Stop the bullshit. You did not steal man my argument at all. You did not steal man my argument at all. You did not steal man my argument at all.
Okay, you're just a moron.
You did not steal man my argument at all.
This is what every interaction with Lewis. Shut the fuck up, Lewis.
Stop with the bullshit, Travis.
Okay, I'm gonna stop both of you.
This went so south.
Okay, I'm gonna stop both of you real quick.
Question. I did not. You don't know what a steel man is. I asked you a question. You understand the difference between a question and an argument?
Travis, would you
I didn't make any claim about your position. I just asked you a question.
Please stop your bullshit. Everybody's looking at your bullshit, and they're seeing that you're bullshitting now. So please stop it.
Well, hold on.
You're just a moron.
Please stop it. Please stop.
Hold on. No. Hold on.
Don't come and make these ridiculous
Please stop your
claims
bullshit.
about
you just straw man my position. I never
No,
said
you don't
that
know
all
what a straw man is.
Don't have the intelligence to
Can we all agree to have Carson?
No, I
Carson
didn't
step
even
in
say
so we'll
that
just
you
stop
made that claim. I just said.
I'm gonna mute you guys real quick. Sorry. Okay. I do want to get you guys on a talk by yourselves at some point. But right now I do have to pause that. I'm gonna unmute you guys in a second. But I know there's some animosity with you guys, and anyways, we'll get that all figured out. Not that it matters. You guys can. Okay. I'm gonna unmute you guys now.